Hello and welcome to another event at the Cryosphere Pavilion. My name is James Kirkham and I work for ICCI, and today we're joined by a very special guest, recently back from Antarctica, Dr. Robbie Mallett. We'll be having a quick presentation from Robbie about what it's like to live in Antarctica over the winter, and then we'll be asking questions both from online and in the audience to inspect how Robbie's time was this winter and what it's really like to overwinter in the coldest, darkest, most remote place on Earth. So, Robbie, do you want to give a quick summary of your time then?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about sea ice and just explain what it is first, and then I'll say what we did briefly, and then hopefully James and I'll have a bit of a conversation about the implications and what it was really like. So, Antarctic sea ice in winter 2023. What is sea ice? So, in the middle here is Antarctica, the island, and then it gets surrounded from the summer when there's a little bit of frozen seawater around the outside to the winter when the sea all around the island freezes over, and the thickness of that ice is between 30 centimeters to maybe 2 meters or even 3 meters in some places. And it's a really, really important part of the climate system. So we really like to understand it, but currently we really don't know how thick it is. We really don't know how to model it into the future, and we really don't know even what it was doing in the far distant past. So we'd like to understand a bit about it, and it's really critical that we understand much more about it right now. So my specialty is sea ice thickness. We're interested in how sea ice thins in Antarctica. So especially in recent years when it's covered less area, has it been thinner as well? And also, when sea ice is thinner, is that a response or is that a cause of the really exceptional conditions we've seen recently? So our goal for this campaign that I did this year was to develop sea ice thickness retrieval algorithms. That's a lot of jargon, but basically a method to retrieve sea ice thickness from instruments we put on satellites and send into space. So these instruments look down at the sea ice, and we'd like to work out a way of processing that data to find out how thick the sea ice they're looking at is. But there's a challenge that 2023 in Antarctica was a really exceptional and exceptionally poor time to go and do this. Just wanted to provide a little bit of background on just how bad conditions have been since 2016. So this is the area that gets covered by the sea ice at the annual minimum. And since 2016, so to the right of this line, we've had a series of very low values. And that was the value we had in 2023. So complete record. The situation actually got worse from this. So we started out the year in March with this red dot. And actually, by the time sea ice had grown to reach its maximum, we had an even more exceptional year where we had this red dot in September that is just miles outside what you would normally see. And here is a picture of how the sea ice evolved between the minimum and the maximum. And you can see that 2023 was a totally mind-blowing year, both from a climate science perspective, but also from a climate scientist's perspective, that I was there trying to work on this ice that was just completely obtuse and difficult to work on because it was so in such poor condition. That's a picture, a fairly typical picture of what our work was like. You can see us right in the middle at the bottom. We're installing an instrument that measures the amount of light that penetrates the sea ice. We're standing on 30 centimeter thick ice there, but you can see in the background there's grey ice, which is typically 10 to 15 centimeters thick. And if you were to try and walk on that, you would just fall straight into the ocean, which is at minus 1.8 degrees. So you definitely don't want to do that. So we were there in our small patch of ice that was thick enough to work on. But this picture is a really good metaphor of what happened during the season and how tricky it was to do science. So I guess this is where we're going to transition now. I've described sea ice a little bit into more of a conversation. I've got some photos that will hopefully inform that conversation. But I guess, James, do you have any immediate questions that you want to ask or thoughts?
I mean, I guess I'll kick off by saying that, so I was also in Antarctica around the same time as you, a bit before perhaps. When did you go down again? It was about
halfway. So we went halfway through March and we stayed until the end of October.
Right, okay. So I was slightly further round the continent than Robbie, but it was clear that we were witnessing something pretty extraordinary. And you must have been watching this from home as this sea ice minimum plummeted. So did you have any idea that this would be such an exceptional year that you were going to be living as the ice regrows again?
Yeah, we don't really have any ability to forecast it, so we don't know what the sea ice is going to do months ahead particularly well. But I did have a really good go in February when I realised what was going on. I did a lot of computer programming to try and figure out if this was typically how quickly can sea ice grow and does it rebound from historically low levels, and it appears it does not. So we saw new conditions were exceptional, but we weren't sure if we could extrapolate that into the future of the campaign.
And obviously, novelty is often quite a good thing in scientific research. So, was it perhaps a good thing that you were there during such an unusual year, or was it really a hindrance?
I'd say it was interesting from a personal perspective as a scientist, but we didn't go prepared to document the exceptional minimum in 2023 or the exceptional maximum, in fact. We weren't there to survey the environment. We were really there to do a series of experiments, and it got in the way of the experiments, I would say.
Okay, so talk me through your daily routine when you were there. What's a normal day for you?
So I actually ended up, because we didn't have a lot of science to do quite often, I ended up going to the gym a lot. So you wake up, it's typically dark, and it's going to be dark for most of the day. So you go to breakfast, which is in a separate building. So it means you have to get all your kit on, which is often a parka and goggles and hat and snow boots. And you walk about 200 meters in this kit, and then you take it off again, and you have breakfast and go to the gym if you like. And then we typically figure out what we're going to do for the day. And towards the end of the campaign, when we had some sea ice, we would go and do field research, and we'll talk about that later. But we ended up skewing our campaign towards the lab a lot more. So the meals are often centrally cooked. There's a professional chef, but sometimes it's your turn to cook. And if it's your turn to cook, you have to spend the day cooking for the station. That's 2 days a week. The chef quite reasonably has a weekend. So sometimes you're cooking, and then you all eat communally. So you normally, the first time you see everyone is at lunch, and it's quite nice because Antarctica is a very isolating place, and seeing everyone every day, often twice a day, often 3 times a day if you go to the bar, is a really nice thing to do. So you start to look forward to meals, and they become a really big deal. And then I really tried not to be in the habit of working after dinner, because I would often have to go down to the laboratory building, which is a 10-minute walk in what's often a dark blizzard, and there are some sort of safety implications of that. So often after dinner, I got really good at pool, a lot of time off the ice. That's what bad conditions do. They make you really good at pool. So we tried to keep it 9 to 5 most days, but days that you're in the field, you often prep your kit. You're often up at 6, prep your kit before breakfast, and then use all the daylight hours that God sends, which is often not very many.
Yeah. Is it easy to kind of motivate yourself to go out into the cold blizzard-like conditions, but the ice conditions are so bad that it's really having an effect on your science?
There's you definitely start to get lazy, and you have to fight laziness, where you think, oh, I don't need to put on my coat. I'll just tough it out in a fleece, and that is a really bad habit to get into. So it's often not hard to motivate yourself to get out, but it's hard to motivate yourself to do everything to the standards that you should really be working at in Antarctica, particularly footwear as well. You often find yourself slipping between buildings, not quite wearing the right shoes, and that becomes quite tricky after a while.
Yeah, so I guess you must have realised that this wasn't going to be kind of plan A type scenario when you were there. Right? So at the start of the season, what were you doing with your science? What was the key question you were trying to answer? Did you capitalise on the unusual experience?
So we've got this radar instrument that measures the radar reflectivity of snow, and I don't want to go deeply into the science, but we tried to be flexible, and we did a lot of quite technical experiments on land. We worked on snow on the ground, so we were pushed towards broader questions of physics rather than narrower questions of what is the environment around Rotherham. So that was actually quite good. We really. So I'm writing now quite a holistic study of how snow is on land and on the glacier and on the sea ice, because we just couldn't go on the sea ice every day.
Yeah. So I had a few questions before online asking about safety conditions when the ice was so thin.
Yeah.
So was frostbite a risk? And were you ever scared of falling through the ice, disappearing into the depths?
Yeah. Frostbite's definitely a risk, particularly actually when you go up onto the nearby glaciers, because it's often quite windy there. But frostbite basically is what happens when your fingers get so cold that the tissue in them starts to freeze. And that typically happens in your fingers, but also on your cheekbones. So my research partner, Vishnu, to avoid frostbite, it's basically a team effort. You have to constantly check each other to check that your face isn't freezing off. But that is actually quite obvious, and that's the obvious certain. What's much less obvious is something called a non-freezing cold injury, where your cells don't freeze, but they just get so cold that you can start to do quite a lot of tissue damage anyway, especially after several hours. So that's really the pervasive risk, and it's a risk that we're only realizing about quite recently in polar science. So you actually, it's not just about not freezing, it's actually about not getting really cold as well. And that is a fairly major mental effort, especially when a lot of your work involves kneeling down in snow, often for several hours. It's mostly a matter of teamwork and hit.
And so there's not much research done medically about non-freezing cold injuries. And so is there anything in Antarctica being done to observe and study this?
Yeah, there is some stuff. There's not a non-freezing. One famous type of non-freezing cold injury is not frostbite, trench foot. So trench foot is a famous non-freezing cold injury, and there is a lot of data from around the world, but we're only really starting to realize that it's a common problem in the polar regions recently. So not actually aware of a lot of research being done in Antarctica now, but certainly the medics that are employed down there, they try to pick cold injury specialists to go down there, and that's really useful. So I actually shared a room with the doctor on station for 6 weeks, and he had a lot of expertise about cold injuries, which was really fascinating, actually.
Yeah, actually, I did the Pennine Way recently in April of this year, and also got a touch of trench foot, and I would definitely not recommend it. It's pretty terrible. But I mean, in terms of the animals, is there also a risk from wildlife out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's loads and loads of wildlife around, and they're a risk to us. So a fur seal, which is the most common type of seal, certainly where we were on Adelaide Island, they can run on their feet, and they can run at a surprising pace as well. And if you're facing it, it will run up to you and then get scared, particularly if you wave something at it. But if you're running away from it, it will go for you, and it'll bite you. And then they have incredibly disgusting mouths that will almost immediately form an infection once they've bitten you. So the seals it's really important to stay well clear of the seals, but also you should do that because you shouldn't disturb the environment, so you shouldn't disrupt the ecosystems. There are also elephant seals. So I've got a picture of an elephant seal, actually. Maybe. Those are 2 elephant seals that were by the station. And in fact, this is my favorite elephant seal of all time. That's much, much wider than it is tall.
How big is this thing? Give us a scale.
Elephant seals can weigh several tons, certainly. So I'd say that seal probably weighed about a ton, maybe more than a ton.
How long, how wide?
2 meters long, maybe 3. You might know this better than me, actually.
Yeah, but pretty big.
Yeah, so they're definitely not something that you can move. If the seal is in its place, they're very, very difficult to. If you do need to move them out of the way because they're in danger, it's a very difficult task. This is a picture of a fur seal, so that can run, and they're pretty territorial beings as well. So they won't just flee if you walk near them. They will hiss at you, and they'll do loads of weird stuff, and they'll rear up and lift their heads up to make it clear that you shouldn't be there. Yeah, I've actually got a nice picture. So when you're out on the sea ice like we are here, we're wearing skis because we didn't really know how thick the ice was at this point. You sometimes find these seal holes, and we found a seal hole, and that's where they breathe when the ice cover is total. So when there's nowhere for them to come up between ice floes and breathe, they will cut those holes with their teeth, and they'll use them to stay alive. So I have a video. Amy, can you play the video of what happens when you find these holes and you find a seal in the hole? And you can see its little nose. Oh, having some buffering there, and it's sort of breathing through the hole, and it's a bubbling.
So those bubbles are the seal breathing.
Yeah, it's two. You can see its two nostrils there. It's twitching, opening and closing. And that's pretty fun. And they're not scared of you, so you can walk right onto the hole and observe the seals breathing. And you actually hear the way to find these holes is you hear the seals before you see the hole, because you can hear them snort very, very loudly. So they get water in their nose and they snort it out.
So I saw a picture back then of when you had skis on. So how did it first feel when you were able to gently venture onto the ice? And how did you know it was safe enough to traverse?
Yeah, I've got a picture of, so the earliest phases of the ice formation looks like this. So we had these big plates because the ice formed in quite quiet conditions. It wasn't windy at all.
It felt like pancakes on pancake days.
Yeah, so this is called nihilus. It forms these like kind of groovy, wavy shapes. And obviously, you can't go on this just by looking at it. And that's about 5 centimeter thick ice. And then it sort of seals together, and you do get these edges that look a bit like pancakes, where the ice cover is total, and that's where it's like glued up together. And that's very smooth. That's unusually smooth for sea ice, I would say. And we should wait for a bit longer, and it gets quite smooth. And we had a bit of snow, but we also had these frost flowers, we call them, which is a rough surface that grows a bit like frost on the top of a tree or things that you get in the UK when it gets extremely cold. And at this point, we just very tentatively go out on it with skis, and we're wearing boat suits. This is my colleague Vishnu on the right, and our station leader Blair on the left. Blair used to be a field guide, so would often come out and help us with the science. He also has a PhD in snow science, which was very handy. So you go out on these skis and you drill a hole in the ice. You can see that Blair's holding this twizzly shaped drill. And then Vishnu is holding a ski pole, and it's a really clever ski pole that you can push through the hole in the ice, and it has a latch that unfolds in it, and you can pull it up and measure the thickness of the ice. And we measured it there to be 20 centimeters, which per the rules in Antarctica that we were working in, we could go out on the sea ice and work on. But it's worth saying that we had to be really conservative in Antarctica, because if that ice detaches from the land and drifts off to the sea, there's no rescue. There's no one's coming in a boat or a helicopter. You're gone. So 20 centimeters is quite a conservative number, but typically if there was a helicopter available or a ship, we'd go out maybe 10 to 15 centimeters on skis. Yeah.
So what's the protocol if something does go wrong? If there's a change in the weather and the ice detaches and you start drifting out towards the Southern Ocean, what happens then?
There's not a lot of a protocol for if that happens, to be honest. It's much discussed, but rarely written down.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of protocol for how to avoid that happening. So you have a GPS that makes a really loud buzzing sound if it starts to drift, but also you constantly are taking note of your surroundings, what's around you. You're making radio calls to the person on station that's looking at the weather forecast. They're calling you if the weather changes. There's lots to do. It's actually quite distracting if you're a scientist. So it's really good to have someone like Blair out there who is handling the safety aspects while you have your head in the snow or something. But we also have this, you can see a sled in the bottom right-hand corner. That's full of survival gear. So if the ice, this is the protocol that we do have. You have a whole bunch of survival gear in there, GPS, spare satellite phone, lots of useful kit to survive on the ice if you have to. But it would be a tricky proposition if you were swept out to sea on sea ice in Antarctica.
And indeed, I think this happened to some of your instruments or something else, right?
Yeah, so actually in that first slide, you can see we're installing some instruments there. And about a week after this photo was taken, the ice just blew out to sea. It got totally nailed in the storm and swept all of our instruments out to sea. And we couldn't chase them because the weather was too bad. So we just had to wait for a whole day until the weather was just calm enough, and we we're really lucky that there was a weather window. So we got out and we found the instruments by a total miracle. That you can probably just see there's a flag sticking out of the ice where we're standing. We saw one of those flags and we found the instrument and we rescued our gear. It was pretty risky and we almost lost a really valuable set of instruments. So that was a lucky escape. But it also showed us how ephemeral and fragile the sea ice is there, that you can be swept out and it doesn't care whether there's humans on it or not.
I love this photo because it just gives you a sense of both the beauty, but also just how exposed, how desolate this environment is. It almost feels quiet just by looking at it. There's no noise, basically. So you spent a long time there, 7 months. And did your behaviour begin to change as you got used to living in this environment, which is so different to other parts of the world?
Yeah, you definitely get more skilled at living in the environment. So you get better at knowing what clothes you need for the conditions. But also the first time you go out, you're really disorganized about, even when you know what you need, the order in which you put your clothes on and take them off, and how you leave your boots, your jacket and stuff. So you get more skilled in that way. But also you start to realize the group dynamics of being isolated on a station with 25 people for months with no, if you fall out, you can't storm off to the pub, you can't go somewhere else. So you have to be not careful but thoughtful about what you say and what you do to not disturb other people's emotional state, I would say.
And have you brought some of those behaviours back to normal life? Would anyone benefit from having a trip for 7 months to Antarctica?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I understand people a lot more. So before, I thought there was this massive spectrum of people, from absolute jerks to really amazing people, and it turns out that spectrum is not nearly as wide as I thought it was. So actually everyone's pretty average, including me, and you only realize that once you view a small group of people, a few people from every single angle, and you see their best, and then you also see their worst, and you realize that most of the time they're in the middle, and everyone's actually quite similar.
And I mean, I get you. I guess you must get super close to the team of people you're working with, because you're working with such a small group, so much, and spending almost every single moment with them. So, like, how did the dynamics of this team evolve over the season that you were there for?
Yeah, it's really difficult because you are really close. You spend all this time together, you hang out together, you eat together, you work together, but you also have responsibilities for each other, and sometimes you need to work for each other. So it's a very strong bond, but it's not like a pure bond of friendship, because occasionally you'll have to say no. Different people will have to tell you no in different ways, and at that point it gets quite difficult. So you're always treading this line between a close bond and friendship, and also having to do like demanding, risky work in a demanding, risky place. So it's quite a unique relationship, really.
Did you have any difficult moments or fall out with people that much, or is it something kind of sort of flat lines?
No, it's not a flat line, that's for sure. Definitely people get increasingly, including me, increasingly sensitive as the winter goes on. It gets quite bad when the darkness is at its peak, when you have the total loss of the sun. So we didn't see the sun for about 2 months at one point. And then there's a little bit of improvement and the mood gets back. And then as the end of the winter comes, people get impatient, and the emotional bonds are much more strained towards the end of the season. So, but on the other hand, you're also getting more alert and more astute at handling the situation. So it's an interesting evolution. There are definitely tricky times when the group is split over an issue, and you get closer and closer to falling out. But actually, I think, and we were told that we did really well as a winter. So we had an unusually harmonious winter compared to some other seasons and some other stations, dare I say.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you say, like, how do you relax after going through these moments? Because obviously there's almost no personal space. You're with people all the time, every day. You can't just leave. will go home. Is there like somewhere quiet you can go for a bit of time on your own, or is it something you have to learn to deal with in another way?
Yeah. So if it's really bad, you can storm off your room, which is not a mature response, but we all seem to do it every now and again. And you do mercifully have your own room at Rotherham. So it's a massive station in the summer. It holds 150 people or so, and then in the winter there's 25. So there's easily enough for a room per person. But you have to do your job and you have to eat. So you can't buy loads of takeaways and microwave them in your room. You have to go to the mess and see the people that you've confronted, which is actually really good because it stops it from stewing or escalating. That you have to be a grown up and be part of the team within the maximum length of time you can have a strop is 12 hours, right? So it can't get that bad. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I think it's easy just to focus on the one base, but I mean, as an overwinterer, you're part of a very small group of people who have actually stayed in Antarctica, living there through this really dark and cold time. I mean, how many other people were in Antarctica roughly when you were there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer, but it will be order of a few hundred, I think. The South Pole and McMurdo bases are pretty big, but all the other stations are really smaller than Rotherham. So Rotherham is maybe the third biggest, maybe the South Pole's smaller. So I'd say 200 maybe people in Antarctica through the winter in maybe 15 stations.
Yeah, not many at all. So you're quite an exclusive club. Do you keep in touch with people afterwards, or is it kind of have some space?
Yeah, so you keep in touch with other bases actually a little bit. There's a winter film festival where all the different stations make a short film on a theme that's released. They release the theme one day, and then you have a weekend to shoot the film, and then you all meet up and compare. But we did events with other British stations where we did like pub quizzes and things like that, darts competitions. So actually, one year, a few years ago, there was a famous darts competition with a station called Bird Island, where Bird Island were consistently better at Rotherham than at darts, and it's done by a phone. So you sort of report the scores and you play on your own dartboards. And then someone from Rotherham was on the way home and went via Bird Island and found out they didn't actually have a dartboard. And it was entirely confected darts competition that they always won and was played for hours and days. But you find ways of amusing yourself. The other thing you can do to amuse yourself is there's recreational opportunities, so you can go skiing. But we were in a tricky position as scientists that every time the weather was good, we'd go and do field work. So we actually didn't go outside for fun very much, because every time we could go outside, it was for work, sadly. I will just say also keeping in touch. I'm sure I will stay in touch, but actually a lot of the people who I wintered with are still there, because we're talking in the Southern Hemisphere summer. And most people who winter at Rotherham go for longer than just the winter. They'll stay the summer before or the summer after, or both.
I want to, before segueing back to the science, I want to zoom in a bit on that film festival you mentioned. So, what was the theme? What was your role? And can you give us a bit of a synopsis?
Well, this is the annoying thing that as a scientist, so we had to do field work that both days at the film festival. So I wasn't actually in it, which is really annoying. But it was snakes on a station, and it came third. And the plot was that we had discovered that the Earth was flat, and in order to be silenced, hundreds and hundreds of snakes were airdropped in to consume the station, and it was about the battle to save Rotherham from that. Just for total clarity, because it's on the internet, the Earth is not, in fact, flat. That's a fictional storytelling device.
Do you know if that film is going to be submitted to like the Venice Film Festival or Cannes?
Sadly, it's not. None of these films are public. They're property only of winterers. Those small group of people who wintered.
So they just stay and live on the base.
They stay and live on the station. And I think there's some things certainly in older film festival rounds that the people now would not want in the public domain. Not for any sinister reason, but just they might just be a bit embarrassed about the costumes.
Yeah. Was that one of the more quirky things you experienced whilst living there, or was there more stuff you can tell us about?
Yeah, the film festival is definitely good. There's a really nice midwinters photo exchange between the stations where you all take some serious and some silly stations, and you send them around in a big email chain. And you get to see the people at the other stations, which is very interesting. Actually, you don't just see the people, but you see a nice picture of their station, and that's a really nice thing to do as well. There's also you make gifts for each other. So at midwinter, there's a big gift exchange, and people put a lot of effort and a lot of time into the gifts they make. So I made a pair of antique-looking snowshoes where I bent laminated strips of wood into like a tennis racket shape and made them into some snowshoes.
Very nice. And I guess when you're so far away from friends or family, that kind of effort really makes the difference and makes you feel like a mini family there. But how did you cope with being so far away from people you love?
It's hard. We were lucky that we had an unusually good internet connection while we were there, a historically good internet connection, in fact. So that was great. That we were actually later in the winter able to do video calls and stuff, but it's still really hard. And I think a lot of people struggle with it. And the demographics of winters are disproportionately single people, because it's just hard to like leave your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your partner at home, but you also miss your parents, your friends. So it's difficult, and you just have to mostly be there for each other and try and be nice.
Yeah.
And everyone's really sensitive to that as well. Everyone's very aware of the strain that people are under. So if you do act in an insensitive way, people are quite understanding and tolerant of that.
Would you go again, or can you not say here if your partner's watching?
No, I probably wouldn't winter again. Mostly for that reason, actually, that it's a really, really long time to be away from your friends and family. But I certainly would do like lengthier field work again. Like, I think I'm a big believer in field science and in the value of it, and it's also just really fun. Like field work, when it works, is so good. So I'm not going to stop being a field scientist, but wintering is, I think, something that I will only do once. Although there are people who've wintered. I think there's someone at Bass who wintered 12 times in their life, maybe more, maybe even 15. And yeah, there are certainly people. One of the winters double wintered, so she's still there now, and she'll be there for another year.
Wow.
She's a marine biologist. Yeah, some people absolutely love it. I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad thing, but just for me, one winter is enough.
Okay. So you mentioned just how much you love the science. So what was the main result you got out of this year? Did you figure out what caused this extraordinary winter in Antarctic sea ice?
Sadly not. I will give you a clue that it has a lot to do with ocean heat, but that's not what actually we were working on. We were collecting radar data mostly, but also investigating how much light penetrates the snow and the sea ice to the ocean below. And we haven't looked at most of the data. So towards the end of the season, once the sea ice really showed up for us, we were collecting so much data that we didn't have time to look at it. And when we did look at it, all we were trying to do was check that everything was working. So we haven't actually found any major conclusions yet of our work, but we did find some really great conditions to study, some really certainly hard to study conditions where there was so much snow on the ice that it flooded the ice by a lot, and that's an endemic situation in Antarctica that we don't often find in the Arctic. That's really scientifically valuable to study. So our slush study will be really useful.
I guess also, so I'm not a sea ice scientist, so correct me if I'm wrong, but thinner ice means more light gets through into the water column.
Yeah.
And so does that have an effect on ecosystems, for example?
Yeah, thinner ice is thinner, so it's easier to penetrate with light, but it also tends to collect less snow. So the real constraint on how much light reaches these ecosystems is the snow, and thinner ice often has thinner snow. And yeah, there's no doubt that the sea ice conditions we saw here in this photo, but that are typical of the season itself, will seriously disrupt the ecosystems. And the exact nature of that disruption is hard to say, but I mean, there's no doubt that if you hit something with a hammer, something will happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, the media this year have loved it because a lot of scientists haven't understood fully why this is happening so quickly, or now, I guess. So, we often talk about sea ice as the Earth's refrigerator. Will this have an impact on the wider world?
It's difficult to say. It's likely that it will have an impact on the ocean, and it'll be harder to form sea ice in the coming winter. So we're in the summer now in the southern hemisphere. But also when sea ice is like this, and the hole that you observed, in fact, in the sea ice, when you were down there, it really exposes the periphery of Antarctica to all sorts of things that will have big impacts on the ice shelves and the margins of the ice sheets. And when they melt, they contribute to sea level rise. So as well as the ecosystem, there are also impacts on sea level rise, which of course has a global impact, and in fact, disproportionately northern hemisphere impact when Antarctic ice slides into the sea. So yeah, there are big impacts outside the cool photos from the island. Yeah.
And we know that sea ice, above almost anything else in the cryosphere, has really, really low thresholds for change in terms of temperature. So, does your field have a future? Have you backed the wrong horse?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that question a lot. So, the key thing about the poles, and the reason they're cold, is because the sun is always quite low, and it goes away in the winter. So we will always form sea ice in the winter unless we do something really, really bad. So even if we follow through on only the pledges that we've made so far, we will continue to form sea ice. It's just the sea ice cover will be radically transformed. And we shouldn't do that, right? We should not radically transform the Earth's sea ice cover to a winter-only cover. But speaking purely selfishly, I think I will still have something to study in my 50s, 60s, or probably not 70s, because I'll be retired by then. I certainly will be retired by then.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? Right, I'm going to open the floor for questions. Now we have some online. So, anyone in the room have any questions first, or I will ask them from online?
Because items are limited during the winter, are there any at the base? Are there any top property items like the last fresh banana or a really popular root?
Yeah, so lots of stuff like that. So when the chocolate goes out once a week, there's a bit of a frenzy and sometimes some politics about who gets what chocolate. When you crack the last egg, that's pretty symbolic. I remember seeing the last egg cracked, and we kept the eggs going for 6 months by turning them really fastidiously twice a day. So we kept fresh eggs for 6 months, and when that thing cracked, it cracked my heart. Because then after you finish all the eggs, you make cakes with tofu. That is not great.
Okay. I'll ask them from online. So the first one is, do you have to wear several layers on your feet?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Actually, no. So we have these amazing no boots where you just wear one pair of thick socks, and then the boot has a liner and an outer. But actually, you can go down to -50, maybe even -70 with one pair of really excellent boots. But elsewhere on your body, I pretty regularly wear 2 hats and a really thick hood, several pairs of gloves sometimes. Certainly your body and legs, lots of layers.
Okay, so not quite what you expected. So another question from online is, does the indoor lighting emulate the sun?
No, actually, you would think it would, right? Because you can get these wide bandwidth full spectrum lights, and we did have a couple of those for seasonal affective disorder, but the actual internal light fittings in the buildings do not do that. So you do need to use the lights. But if I were designing a research station, I would definitely have full spectrum lights.
There you go, Bass. You can suggestion right here from a seasoned field veteran. Anyone in the room? I'll take a little from the room.
So a lot of people would think that when you go to Antarctica, it's a lonely experience. Is the problem too few people or too many people at times?
Yeah, the problem is, and it's a great bunch who were down there, but sometimes it's just not the people you want that are down there. But it's a very crowded way of being alone sometimes, that you're lonely in a crowd, and you can always get your own personal space in your room, so you can always separate yourself. But sometimes when you maybe are a bit lonely and everyone's at work or asleep, then you can truly be quite lonely. So it comes and goes. Yeah.
I've got another one actually on the back of that. So on ships, which is where I do most of my work, we do back-to-back shifts. So the ship is working all the time, even through the night. For example, is that similar in the winter, or do you have like a set schedule where everyone is awake at the same time?
Yeah. So there's 25. Well, there are 25 of us, and that's half the year. You might note if you do a week each. So everyone does a week of night shift where you flip your time and you stop doing your normal job and you patrol the station at night, which is freaky and a bit scary. So if there are people in the field, as there are sometimes early in the field or early in the season, or even for recreation, you 3 times a night go and sit in the air traffic control tower. There are no planes, but that's where the big radios are, and you sit there and you look out over the Antarctic night and you listen for radio calls for emergencies. But you also check all of the pipes, the gas, check that nothing's on, because fire is a really big hazard in Antarctica. Electrical fires particularly are really common. But the night shift is I'll never forget my week of nights, because you never do anything like that in your life again.
Yeah. Okay. So on the back of that one, another one from online is, how do you keep your circadian rhythm stable
when you're not on the night shift?
Exactly.
Yeah. Going to the gym every morning, waking yourself up thoroughly. So go to breakfast, stare at the lamp for 10 minutes as you eat, and then you've eaten, you've got the light, and then you do some exercise and you are set. But as soon as you fall out of that rhythm, you're in trouble.
Right. Okay. So it's about having really set routines almost.
Yeah. You've got to do that. You've got to stay hydrated and no caffeine after lunch. These are great this is great life advice as well.
Yeah.
Right. This is
Do
how
you
to
do this or not?
Yeah. I'm a big believer in the circadian rhythm in the mid latitudes. Yeah.
Any more from in the room? There you go.
Just for curiosity, how many times have you been there?
I've been to Antarctica twice. I went last year and the year before.
So the first time you went there, is it something that you have meet that you didn't expect to meet? I'm not asking about the second time, just going you were more prepared.
Well, no, both my campaigns in Antarctica have been quite different. So the first one was a 2-month research cruise where you take a very different set of equipment. But I never, no one's ever asked me that, actually. Is there something I forgot that I really needed? I guess the answer must be no, because otherwise I'd have an answer on the tip of my tongue. I thought really hard both times about what I was going to take. So I had a spreadsheet with multiple tabs of all the different things. And then once they went in the bag, I ticked them off. So I'd say if you go, you should be prepared in hard and soft copy. But no, nothing critical.
So you went back.
Yeah, I went pretty prepared. Yeah.
I think there's also quite a big difference between the first and the second time you go down, because I've also been twice now, both time on ships. And the first time you're kind of overawed by everything. It's like so much, this huge ice sheet which is just stretching out literally as far as I can see and more. And it's really awe-inspiring, but you come away kind of not being able to take it in so much. And the second time, you notice the small things so much more. And even like the really beautiful, like the way the snow shivers and the shimmers, the ocean lighting is just really, really special. So I think you do see a lot more the more you go. Perhaps not in the kind of the same awe-inspiring way, in another different way. Was that the same for you?
Yeah, I think so. You certainly become much more sensitive to how things work as it goes on, rather than you initially just experience you're at the mercy of how everything works, and then you begin to actually take an active role in things, and you become much more alive to not just the human stuff, but also the environment, and you start to notice that how different weather all lines up, and how conditions change, and what the snow's like the day after a windstorm and stuff. So it's pretty good, and I'm sure that when I go again, I will have just as many revelations. Actually, I should add, actually, now I think about it, I went to the Arctic a few times before I first went to Antarctica, so that was quite a useful primer, like a low risk primer for having the right stuff.
Yeah.
So take us back to day one, back in civilization after your winter. What was that like?
it was raining, and in London, I flew. Oh well, so actually, depends. I should say Chile is actually civilization, so I went via Chile. And that was initially very strange because it's another country that I haven't lived in, so it's a bit strange for me anyway. But that was really nice. I bought loads of fruit because we hadn't had any fresh fruit for months and months and months. But on getting back to London, I just remember it raining and me really enjoying the rain and just walking around in quite a warm rain, which felt even warmer because I was acclimatized to the cold. And I didn't find it as overwhelming as I thought I would. The moon was upside down was another thing that I'd become extremely aware of the moon because it was dark most of the time. And yeah, I noticed the moon was a bit funny.
Well, this wonderful image of you right now, like walking around London in the rain, like something out of the Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Right, a science question here, Phoebe. I'm not sure whether it's quite your field, but can you comment on the real-time ice sheet and whether these habitats are known to include any new information available for access in the Antarctic?
I'm going to interpret this as a question about digital twins.
Maybe.
If this person is asking about a digital twin, I think digital twins are mostly good. That's my expert knowledge.
Can you explain what they are?
Mostly good. We can go wild. So there's a push to model important Earth systems in real time and be able to get rapid feedback on what's happening to complex systems. So that's becoming increasingly common in Antarctica. There's a big European project that does that. It's great. It's great. But I feel like there is a bit of a fashionability around saying digital twin when you really probably mean model.
Right. Okay. 1, 2 questions here. So, can you access the internet daily to speak with your family? And 2, did you experience SADS, so sleep affective disorder?
Yeah. The first answer is yes, and that's a fairly recent development in Antarctica due to new satellite technology. Really, really important, actually, really a massive boost to our science because we had instruments malfunction, and that normally happens, and we could video call engineers who would like troubleshoot in real time. So that was massive, but also emotionally, being able to talk to people at home is good for you, but it's also good for people at home who miss you. It's a two-way street, and of course, being emotionally healthy boosts your science indirectly as well. So that's a bonus.
Second science question is, it may not be your field, but is it true that oxygen isotopes from ice cores have shown historically CO2 levels follow ocean temperature changes by several centuries? I think that means lead them by several centuries, and then after that, global temperatures fall again once CO2 levels peak. So, is there a link between CO2 and global temperature and ocean temperatures too?
There's a strong link between CO2 and global temperature, although the lag. I do know the answer to this narrow one. That although it is a bit confusing because during the ice age cycles, the temperature slightly led to the carbon dioxide, although recent research has narrowed that lag down to basically within the margin of error. Although there are reasons that makes sense, that temperature would lead carbon dioxide historically, although in the modern era, something else is going on. Actually, the carbon dioxide is causing the temperature rise. With regard to oxygen isotopes in ice and ocean, I could not comment on the lead or the lag.
I've got one we got asked earlier at the exhibit pavilion, so I think it's a really good question actually. Was it as cold as you expected it to be, or were you kind of adjusting that?
No. So normally, when I've worked in the Arctic, we have total sea ice cover, and that means that the heat from the ocean, which can't go below minus 1.8, is actually quite easily transmitted to the it's blocked from reaching the atmosphere, so the air gets really, really cold. Whereas here, you can see in this photo, the ocean was in good contact with the atmosphere, so the atmosphere just couldn't actually get that cold unless it was an air mass moving off the continent. But because we were on a peninsula, we actually didn't get that very often, so the average temperature was only minus 10 probably, and it snapped down occasionally to minus 20, but compared to the Arctic, where would fairly regularly work in -25, -30. It was a warm campaign. Yeah.
More questions from the audience in the room?
Otherwise, we could wrap it up.
Got a couple of other ones to ask you to kind of begin to wrap up. So, what was the worst thing? Like, what was the lowest point when you were there?
The drifting off of the instruments was pretty bad. So, unfortunately, we were able to get them back. Mostly the boat worked and the weather was good, and we drove out to sea and got them back. But the night where they drifted off, I felt, even though it wasn't my fault, we did our best and we didn't make any mistakes and we made a good decision and we were unlucky. It feels like it's your fault when that happens, because you're down there and you're a scientist and your identity is very merged with your job. So when the science isn't going well, it feels like you're not doing well.
Yeah.
So that was a very low point. The high point is a secret, actually. So something happens around midwinter that only people who have wintered there know, and it's a secret. It's a really well kept secret. So you start to believe after a few months that nothing can be kept secret, because you're at basically a government run research installation where like there's all kinds of good reasons that things aren't kept secret. Secrecy in organizations is actually quite bad, but there is one really nice secret that I'm not going to say what it is.
Okay, that's a reason for you all to go and overwinter in Antarctica.
Yeah, you'll have to winter.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. So we are at COP28, and we're just approaching the end of the first week. Some progress has been made, but there's a long way to go yet before the final decision and a lot of work to do. So, as a CI scientist, have you got a message for negotiators and ministers and delegates who are working right now and are coming in next week?
Yeah, I'm gonna. James is the scientific advisor to ICCI, so I'm gonna say 2 degrees is too high, which you can read on the front of this year's State of the Cryosphere report that James helped put together, and that is actually a really good message that we're still fighting to keep global temperature rise to 1.5, but there's a bit of a culture that's maybe developed in recent years that if we go past 1.5, that's okay, because we'll just stop at 2. You know, we'll just boost it up to the highest limit of the Paris Agreement, and actually that'll be fine. But it turns out that in terms of the cryosphere, so in terms of the sea ice that you can see here, but also these icebergs that are made of ice sheets and glaciers that have slid off the land, and even the snow covering the mountains in the back. 2 degrees is actually really, really bad, especially in this picture, which is on the Antarctic peninsula and super vulnerable to climate change, and it's already changing really rapidly there. So my big message would be that we can't just blast past 1.5 and then settle for 2. We have to stop as soon as it's possible, even if that is 1.6 or 1.7.
Yeah, thanks for the plug to the State of the Cryosphere report. We'll try and drop that link into the chat of the YouTube video below. And yeah, you're right. So we've even had Bill Gates on the record earlier this week saying that if we keep warming below 3 degrees, everything will be okay. And that is completely not true for, well, many other systems, but especially for the cryosphere.
Yeah.
So with that message ringing in your ears, please go out, spread the word to delegates at this conference. Thank you so much, Robbie, for joining us. This has been a really fascinating insight into what is probably once in a lifetime experience, overwintering in Antarctica. So thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause from the audience. Thank you for coming. And those of you online, please follow along for further events at the Cryosphere Pavilion. We're running all next week as well. So see you again. Thank you very much.